skipped some finance stuff because we had to cover all the Trump stuff, and we'll cover a little bit of that today. But I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's going on with finance economically, with people, with personal finance. And there's a couple trends that are happening within the generations. And we'll talk about the millennials first, and then we'll go into Gen X and what's happening to them, because that's going to eventually happen to the millennials who follow Gen X, right? So the millennials, between whatever it is, what is it, 29 and like 30 or 43 or 44 or something like that, 40. So that generation, my generation, gets shit on a lot. But kind of understanding that we went through some economic distress in the beginning of our adulthood, which was kind of unique. And we were the first generation in history to make less money than our parents, factoring in for inflation and all that. And that kind of affects now how we vote, how we think about things, how we purchase, because we tend to be a lot more frugal. It's kind of like, you hear stories about people that grew up in the Great Depression being extremely frugal, even, during booming economic times, because they're paranoid it could always go back, right? So you get some of that with the millennial generation. But there's a guy, Scott Galloway, he was on The View. He had an interesting book. It wasn't a great book, but it was okay. But he did make an interesting point. He's on The View, and they're going to talk about it. So here's Scott Galloway on The View with Whoopi Goldberg and the crew there. Oops.
Best-selling author, entrepreneur, and professor Scott Galloway has been making headlines for warning that the U.S. economy is setting young people up for failure. But he's also providing some solutions with his new book, The Algebra of Wealth, the simple formula for the financial security. Please welcome Scott Galloway.
Yes.
Alyssa has the first question.
So, Scott, I'm so glad to have you here. You're a very successful entrepreneur, highly regarded professor of marketing.
Go on.
And my favorite co-podcaster with Kara Swisher. Yeah. I listen to you all the time. I'm such a fan of your insight. And what you delve into something so important in this book. You call it the war on the young in this country. Mm-hmm. You say that the U.S. is destroying young people's futures in some ways. Can you talk about that?
I think ground zero for what ails America is that for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents at the age of 30. Mm-hmm. That's the first time that creates rage and shame in every household. The average 7-year-old is 72% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. The average person under the age of 40 is 24% less wealthy. What's the result? People are opting out of America. It used to be 63% of 30 to 34-year-old able-bodied people had kids. Now it's 27%. And I don't think it's because they've decided they don't want kids. I think it's because they've decided, well, we haven't raised minimum wage in 40 years, all the tax cuts go to older people. The largest capital transfer in history happens every year. Young people transfer $1.5 trillion to the wealthiest generation in history, and that's seniors. Young people aren't entitled. They're entitled to be enraged.
So I think that's a great point. And that's the problem is that especially millennials, Gen X to a certain degree too, and now Gen Alpha a little bit, all of our money is going to our parents, to the boomers. And they were the wealthiest generation in the history of this country. And they're still getting all of our money. So it's socialism for the elderly and the old that already have the money. And it's capitalism for the rest of us, which is why a lot of us is just sort of checked out.
Well, and also he brings up sort of another interesting point about the choice not to have children and what some of that is about. Mm-hmm. It also relates to what we keep hearing about housing, is that a lot of millennials feel like they've been priced out of that. They don't think home ownership is really a thing they can do. And I feel like that same idea transfers on to what people feel capable of doing in terms of having families. Is it about, one's personal goals and desire, or are they just looking around situationally and being like, I don't know how I can juggle all of this financially?
Right. So you got to remember this. So just to focus on the mental attitude, to sort of illustrate on your point. When you talk about the boomers, they were coming up in their adult years, were the 80s and the 90s, which were the 20 the biggest growth years in the economy. And they were huge, and women just started joining the workforce and getting into more middle management positions. and it was, the .com era, and things were great, and they kept voting and voting and voting for things like what they called neoliberalism and neoconservatism, this deregulation of the markets, deregulation of all this stuff, so we can have more opportunity to make more. And they put everything on credit, and they get all these debts and everything. And then what ended up happening was when Bush was president, but part of it's his fault, part of it was Clinton, deregulating Glass-Steagall and all that. It got to the point where you had recession after recession after recession because these people thought they could just grow their way out of any problem. We can run up the credit card, our personal credit cards, as much as we want because we're growing so fast it doesn't matter. And they thought that was going to last forever. So they spent way too much. I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about individuals. Mom and dad, right? They got the huge house and the car and all this, and they got it all on loans and credit. And that's part of what killed them. And it's the one thing, like with Dave Ramsey when he bitches about credit, it's like credit's not a bad thing, it's bad the way people used to use it. And that's how he became famous, was being the guy who yelled against credit. And he wasn't entirely wrong at the time. He is now. He's been wrong about a lot of other things, but that's the mentality. So they came in, so like my parents, oh yeah, I'm doing okay now, I'm going to go buy a $60,000 or $70,000 sports car. As where I'm in this similar position, and I'll sit there and go, ooh, maybe I can get a used sedan that's still in really good shape, right? Or maybe, do I really even need a car? Because then there's gas and insurance, and I got to store the car and pay for parking and cleaning the car and or do I want to use that money for something like, investing for my future, right? So it's interesting because that's part of the problem with marketing going on in business. Now, we've had good sales and record sales and things have been going up. I think that's mostly Generation Alpha and the boomers, because wages have now started to go up, and that was a big thing he pointed out. But wages have been stagnant for a long time. So we got paid less and less and less, even though our productive-wise, the Gen X and then millennials were the most productive generations in the history of this country, and they got paid the least. So they worked the hardest, produced the most, and got paid the least. And now the big debates in Congress are, do we cut their Social Security and their health care? So you can see why a lot of them aren't thrilled, and a lot of them have checked out. I mean,
right.
And he's right. We have a right to be pissed. And it's like, yeah. And I've seen jokes about the only thing boomers and alphas agree on is millennials suck. And it's like, yeah, because we grew up in the shitty times. We have a different mentality about the world.
Well, the funny thing is, one thing that is oftentimes, expressed is a dislike. It's funny, you and I don't fall into the same category.
No.
Hey guys, I'm an Xer, he's a millennial.
Yeah.
We're very close in age, but we're right on the divide.
We're right on the line. Yeah.
So in terms of approximately where I lie, people my age and slightly older than me are being pegged for being sort of checked out. Mm-hmm. I think about where you are gets pegged for being a little checked out too. But like, my God, can you blame any of us? Like, in our age bracket, we've been handed the whole shit storm, and now the next shit storm is now we want to start taking shit away from you in terms of when you can actually get Social Security, if you can get it, how much of it you can get, what age, like. Yeah, right. There's a real reason for us to be tuned in. We've been handed crap, and more crap.
Yeah, and that's the thing is because we fall in that sort of gap area. But, yeah, you got to remember, it's like, if you're a millennial or a young Gen Xer, you started your adulthood in the aughts, in the early 2000s. And what happened? Well, we had the 2001 recession, 9/11, the 2002 recession. And then the economy didn't do much better. Next thing you know, we're in the two longest wars in American history simultaneously. That's all getting paid for. They're borrowing a lot of that money out of the Social Security Trust Fund. On top of that fact, you're going into the housing crisis, 5 or 6 years later. So you're an adult trying to start your career, start your life, and it's recession, high unemployment, war, cutting of education funding, especially for men, because they were trying to up military recruitment. So, like, I remember my student loans, I was getting just enough to cover my tuition and books and everything until after the war started, and then my tuition, or my student loans got cut in half. And I had to work 3 jobs to finish college. The last 2 years I was there. I was working 50 hours a week and going to school full time. I was fried. I looked like shit when I finished college. Most of my friends just dropped out and joined the military because that's all they could do. So, I mean, they did that. That's what happened. And that's why you have so many, like, men in my generation that don't have college degrees and a higher number of women that do. Right? I mean, all these things happened, and they happen to your life, and then that it changes the outlook of your life and the course of your life. And a lot of what comes down to with finance, I think people focus too much on money, when it's really what it's about is distribution of resources. And then you have to factor in, how do I want to distribute the resources so I can have more control over my future? And sometimes that means, look, I want the new sports car, but I also want to retire at some point. What's more important? And I think millennials think that way more and more. And they're starting to realize, we might end up working until we die if we don't have some solution here. And that's why I think the idea is like, well, maybe we should think about upping Social Security or getting universal health care, socializing things a little bit more. Was a good idea. And I think that's where Biden's done some smart moves on this, is this idea of, well, maybe we need a wealth tax. Yes, of course we need a wealth tax. Maybe we need to do that to save Social Security. Yeah. Maybe we need to make sure everybody's got health care. Yeah. Maybe we need to start forgiving student loans. Yeah. Yeah. That would solve a lot of our problems. Granted, you're doing it to us now when we're in our, late 30s and 40s, right? But, it would have been better if you'd have done this shit when we were in our 20s. But I can tell you right now.
However, even doing it now, people have the chance to try to salvage their own retirement to a certain degree, as opposed to just keep wading through the shitstorm they've been put in,
Right. And I don't know about the whole outlook of all millennials. I don't speak for all millennials, but I can tell you from my position, it's like, I don't want to see Gen Z and Gen Alpha go through that shit. The housing crisis. I mean, they've already fucking suffered when they were children from the pandemic.
Right.
which Trump totally mishandled. We lost 1 million Americans died. It just damaged our economy. It wasn't until Biden became president and dumped all this money back in that our economy started to jump back. And right now we're kicking the ass of all the other developed nations. We've got a better pandemic recovery. It's still not great. But we'll watch another minute is. But I think that's the good point to point out is when you think about your finances going forward from these generational perspectives, you got to think about, okay, what is the future going to potentially look like? And right now, the boomers are still in control. I mean, the president, the guys running for president were born in the 40s. I mean, they're 80. It's like almost a century ago. Might as well elect Count Dracula at this point. So I'll jump into this for a sec.
Are transferring money from the young to the old. It is the least American thing we could do.
Wow. I got a question.
Yeah.
You think the government has something to do with it? Because the government treats us, the taxpayers, like we're a wallet. So there is no money. There's no generational wealth to leave to young. Because I'm sitting watching my money disappear into the hands of other people. What do we do to fix the tax codes so that young people can have that? Because when I was 30, I wasn't making any money either.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point.
I'm going to jump into that. That is the perspective of a wealthy person wanting to keep their money. They're taking all my money and it's going to other people. Yeah, that's what taxes are, whoopee. And the bottom line is, you didn't have a lot when you were in your 30, but you had a lot more opportunity. Right? Because you think about that, 30 years ago in the 90s, she had a lot more opportunity in the 80s and 90s.
Or at the very least, her general age bracket did.
Well, yeah, well, think about this. Just like a great example of how this is kind of become a nepotistic sort of inheritance system, right? and how that's changed so quickly because wealthy people are allowed to become wealthy and wealthier and keep their money and just give it to their kids. They have a huge advantage from the get-go. Whoopi's a great example of this. What are the odds in today's just entertainment society in Hollywood that a black woman from nowhere becomes a famous actress and comedian whose parents aren't rich? Almost none. 95% of Hollywood anymore, all those people, their parents were in film industry. They were producers or actors or whatnot.
Right.
95%. What are the odds somebody from nowhere, like Whoopi Goldberg, is going to come in and actually break in? None. Why would I do that when I can get Will Smith's kids?
Right.
See, you created these dynasties, and it's shut everybody else out. That's part of the problem. And she's talking about how do we continue that? And she's not talking about, but how do we distribute the taxes so it'll help the younger generations? And how do we get the money out of these people's hands so there's an equal distribution of opportunity and power? That's how you fix this problem. Otherwise, it's just going to be the rich keep running up the score. And honestly, right now, with the wealth gap the way it is, I mean, if this was a Little League game, we'd have called it already. I mean, the difference between the top 1% and all the rest of us combined, they own more than all the rest of us combined. It's so fucked up. They just don't see it. That's the problem.
Because there's a myth that the rich don't pay their taxes. Actually, super earners, people who have a lot of current income, probably some of the people at this table living in the city, pay upwards of 50% of their taxes.
That's true. It's devastating.
Who gets...
Okay, that's misleading. Here's what it is. Those people do not pay 50% of their money in tax. They pay 50% of the taxes. Okay? Now, that's true, and you might sit there and go, wow, gee, God, they're paying so much. Yeah, but they have so much. If Lacey inherits $1 billion, and I'm working my ass off making $100,000 a year, and I pay $25,000 in tax, right? I'm paying 25% of my income. If Lacey pays 1% of her income, that's $10 million. Well, Lacey paid way more than you did. No, she didn't. She has $1 billion. She didn't pay shit. It's comparative. Right?
Absolutely.
And honestly, $25,000 to somebody who makes $100,000 is a lot of fucking money. $10 million to a billionaire is nothing. It's comparative. That's the thing that's bullshit about that. Yeah, did they pay more dollar-wise? Yeah, because they have all the money. They're hoarding it and keeping it for themselves. That's why we need to tax that shit, to get it back into the system. We're talking about growing the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, once you make the jump to light speed and become a super owner, you own stocks and real estate, very wealthy people, the 25 wealthiest Americans paid an average tax rate of 8%. Corporations used to pay 3.5% of GDP, now it's 1%. Corporate taxes are the lowest they've been since 1939. So who do you have? You have overtaxation of the super earners, overtaxation of young people, housing's up fourfold, right? Education's up twofold, and they're making less money. So they make less money, and everything's gotten more expensive, and 210 times a day, Whoopi, they get a notification that they are failing, with other people vomiting their faux success in their face. So I'm not doing as well, and yet it seems like everyone else is doing really well. This is a breakdown, and America's not about identifying a superclass of rich kids and freakishly remarkable people and turning them into billionaires. It's about giving the bottom 90 a shot at being in the top 10. We have lost the script.
Yeah.
We've lost the plot.
Well, and I think that's even very narrow, because he's trying to sell a book. And he's trying to sell the personal finance dream. This is how you become rich. That's why I would say his book isn't that great. Because the bottom line is, if it's the top 10%, it's always going to be just 10% of the people. There's never going to be more than 10% in the top 10%. It's a tautology. I mean, it's... right? A tautology. It's just stupid.
Way to do math, Duncan. Way to do math.
Right, no, simple, right? And the thing about it that kills me is what we're talking about, what we should be talking about is not how do we give the bottom 90, sort of the opportunity kind of thing. It's more of what we need to be talking about is how do we raise the standard of living for the bottom 99%. So we don't have a lot of these problems. So they aren't having lower wages and getting priced out. So they have the opportunities to get education and all that stuff. How do we fix that problem? And that's not what he's addressing at all. Because he can't sell that. Right? If I were writing a personal finance book, it'd be like, no, you can do it all on your own. Just believe. Right? You can be rich just like me. And how did I get rich? By telling you I could make you rich and you bought my book, dipshit. That's kind of what he does. But that's my thing. It's like he's hit on some good points. It's amazing. The guy cannot finish a syllogism. Right? Well, let's see. They're making less money. Things are costing more money. What do we need to do? Lower taxes on the rich. That's what he just did.
Yeah, because that definitely helps.
That's what he just did. No, let's make it a more progressive tax scale and lower taxes on the poor and raise them on the rich and then distribute more money back down to the poor. He's doing a reverse Robin Hood, and that's what I think is funny. And they're all wealthy women on that show. And they're yeah, this is good, yeah. Because he's telling them what they want to hear. Yeah, the problem is they're not motivated. Yeah, well, why not? Oh, they don't know how to save money or do stuff, blah, blah. No, they're not motivated because they don't have the fucking resources. Give them the resources, you'll be more motivated.
Also, you have to be able to see how something is going to pay off.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just grinding your gears for nothing. Yeah. Sometimes, I'm a teacher by day. Maybe you're noticing student A. Student A doesn't seem particularly motivated.
Mm-hmm.
If you do a little digging, what you might realize is student A doesn't have much reason to be motivated. Student A can't actually see where any of it pays off.
Right.
So people have to see where there's a payoff.
Right. And I think in more terms of, especially in terms of education, because remember, I started college when things were still really good. Things got bad when I was in college. And this is when I started my career. Everything sucked. But the thing about it is when I started college, you didn't go to college because you wanted to have the better job. You went to college because you needed to get educated, just in general for your life. I didn't go to college because I was looking to get the career and make a ton of money. I was going to college because you just go to get educated. That's what we did back in the 90s, the early 2000s. Now it's like the whole focus is, well, if I'm going to go to college, it costs so much, I better get a big payout. It's like, no, you should just go to college for the sake of going to college. That's kind of the point. That's how it is everywhere else in the world. So, anyway, I just wanted to kind of point with that. But it does go back to this other issue, too, of this all leads into the bigger sort of issue with the government and with the economics of the society and people's personal finance, which is we just went through the pandemic. We're coming out of the pandemic, and it's a recovery period. This is not a rapid, things are growing, things are good, the economy's good, but this is not like a big growth period where things are ultra pristine, unless you're rich already, which is what their perspective was.